Hey guys, this is Mark Howard, author of the Griffin Legends fantasy novel series. Thanks for joining me here. I got a really fun, interesting question here in the comment to my last video that I was debating whether to save that or not for the Q&A, but it's a good one, and so I decided to do a whole video on it. So here we go. I get this question actually fairly often here. How do you do war, right? How do you do period weapons and armor? How do you do battle tactics, sieges, all of that kind of stuff, right? And the short answer here is research, right? There's no substitute for hitting the books, right? Military history is something that I have been interested in for a really long time, and so I've read a lot on this stuff. And so that's the short answer, right? You need to read a lot on this, and that will give you some ideas about how different people resolved armed conflict throughout various points in history. And so that's the first and the largest step there. The second step, which is equally important, is once you've done your research, you need to be able to figure out how this would apply to your own fantasy world, right? Like in my case here, I very particularly set out to write a fantasy world that would in so many ways reflect the technological and cultural zeitgeist of high medieval Europe, right? So about the year 1000 to give or take 1300-ish, right? And so there's a very particular set of technology that these people have available. There's a certain way that these people tend to fight with that technology. And so those are some big considerations in how do I do the battles in my book. Now, along with that, you need a bit of imagination, right? Because this is a fantasy series, and there are some unusual creatures that these soldiers might be faced with, right? Things like cyclopses, griffins, dragons, right? There's all these fantasy monsters that are also there. And so you have to use your imagination a bit in deciding, like, okay, here's how these particular kinds of soldiers normally operate. What would they do if faced with a big monster that's 12 foot tall? Or, you know, whatever the scenario is there. Now, that's where you got a little bit of leeway, right? With these imaginary creatures, at least, you can write the rules to a certain extent for how combat with them works, but you also want to think about the physics of it, right? In determining what might seem the more natural response, right? Again, in the case of like a cyclops here, if my cyclops is this big muscular guy, then I'm probably not going to want to get super close to him, right? I'm going to want to keep my distance, and so that might mean that I just keep shooting bows and arrows at him until he falls over, or maybe I do something like surround him with a bunch of guys with spears and just poking him until he dies, right? So you think about some of the physics involved with this, and that can put you on a more believable path here with your fantasy battles. And another thing that I do to that I think makes my fights a little bit more realistic is to not be afraid to have my protagonist make mistakes during the fight, right? Even though he might be one of the leaders, and you might have this big plan on how to engage in battle, that doesn't mean he actually knows everything going on, right? The other side might be planning something different that completely surprises him. Or maybe he's just a mortal human being that doesn't have everything work out the way he wants it to. So that can also help give you a realistic battle there. So, yeah, one last thing to think about here, and then I'll try to cut this short here, because I could go on and on about a lot of different things to do with these battles and how to write war in fantasy, but for the sake of all of our attention spans, I'll finish with this one final thought here. If you're going to create fantastical weapons, right? If there's going to be weapons and armor that do not behave in the way that real world weapons and armors do, try to still make it believable, right? If we've got a sword that's 12 feet long, it's gonna take a really big guy to carry that, right? Or it's gotta be made out of some sort of material that is super light so that an average soldier can carry it into the fight and swing it around a few times and not just exhaust himself. And so those are some things to think about there. So again, the big takeaways here, right? Do a lot of research. Read up on battles and warfare and the tactics, armor, and training of the period your own warfare most closely wants to portray. So that's the first step there. Second step, try to think about things logically, right? How does terrain play a factor? What fears, what motivations are going into the different sides of the combat here? And then lastly, again, also think about the physics of it, right? Think about what makes sense here given real world properties in as much as they would apply. So anyway, that's what I got for now in this video. Like I said, there's a lot more we could talk about, but I will refrain for the moment and save that for a future video here. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. You kind of know how this whole make things viral stuff make things go viral works at this point. Anyway, we'll see you next time.